Have you ever noticed how you subtly shift who you are just a little bit depending on who you're talking to?
Oh, absolutely. Like you're maybe one person with your best friend, another with your boss.
Yeah, and a completely different version for, that one quirky family member.
Well, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. actually observed this really well. He said, without wearing any mask we are conscious of, we have a special face for each friend.
That's it. And we tend to think our personality is this like stable thing deep inside us. But what if it's constantly being shaped by the people around us?
It's a really fascinating idea, isn't it? And it leads us straight into today's deep dive.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a shortcut to getting well informed on a topic that might just radically shift how you see human connection. We're talking about the groundbreaking work of Harry Stack Sullivan and the School of Interpersonal Psychoanalysis.
That's right. We're unpacking a key chapter from Freud and Beyond, a history of modern psychoanalytic thought by Stephen Mitchell and Margaret Black.
You've given us these fantastic sources, and our mission today is to guide you through Sullivan's really quite revolutionary ideas.
Yeah, we'll explore how he redefined personality, how he understood anxiety in a totally new way, and how he basically changed the game when it comes to therapy.
So prepare for some potential aha moments that might reframe how you see interactions, maybe even your own. And we'll do it all in plain language, making these complex ideas stick.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself, Harry Stack Sullivan. Who was he and what made his early work so, well, different?
Right. Sullivan was an American psychiatrist, active back in the 1920s, and he really cut his teeth working with schizophrenic patients at St. Elizabeth's Hospital.
Which was pretty challenging work then, I imagine. The dominant view at the time from Emil Kraepelin, called schizophrenia, dementia precox.
Meaning?
Meaning, Kraepelin saw it as a neurophysiological thing, like physically based, leading inevitably to deterioration. He thought these patients were essentially disconnected, locked away internally.
With symptoms like catatonia or paranoid rages that just pushed people away, almost like a biological dead end.
Exactly. That was the prevailing wisdom. But Sullivan, he observed something completely different.
What did he see?
He found his schizophrenic patients were actually, quote, extremely sensitive and responsive to their interpersonal environment.
Sensitive, not disconnected.
Right. Despite their often disordered communication, he felt they were exquisitely aware, often painfully so, of other people. This was, a radical observation. It set him on a totally new path.
That really flips the script. Okay, so make this really concrete. Let's jump ahead a bit to a later case Sullivan's work influenced. Maya Abbott.
Yes, good example. Decades later, you have R.D. Laing and Aaron Esterson in Britain, heavily influenced by Sullivan. They worked with severely regressed schizophrenic patients.
And they challenged the idea that symptoms were just random noise.
Precisely. Take Maya Abbott. She had auditory hallucinations, felt unreal, felt like her thoughts were controlled from outside. If you just saw her individually, her symptoms seemed like this purely internal breakdown.
Okay. But the key was observing her with others. Right,
Yeah.
specifically her parents.
Exactly. When Lane and Esterson observed Maya with her parents, a whole different picture emerged. Maya often had ideas of reference, this feeling that things happening around her were somehow about her.
She felt something she could not fathom was going on between her parents, seemingly about her.
Right. And get this, when all three were interviewed together, her mother and father kept exchanging with each other a constant series of nods, winks, gestures, knowing smiles.
Whoa.
These signals were, quote, obvious to the observer. But here's the kicker.
Yeah.
The parents themselves denied doing it.
Oh my gosh. So Maya's paranoia, her struggle to figure out communication, it suddenly makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. She was mistrusting her own mistrust because what she clearly perceived was being denied by the very people doing it. Her supposedly bizarre and meaningless behavior was actually a pretty rational response to a confusing, almost gaslighting interpersonal situation.
That leads right into Sullivan's core idea, doesn't it?
It really does. His core principle became, the individual is simply not the unit to study. He argued that human beings are inseparable, always and inevitably, from their interpersonal field.
So personality isn't just in you.
Exactly. It's not something that resides inside you. Instead, it appears in interactions with others. Sullivan famously said that personality is made manifest in interpersonal situations and not otherwise.
And he defined it as, how did it go?
As the relatively enduring pattern of recurrent interpersonal situations which characterize a human life.
That's huge. It means your personality isn't some fixed internal blueprint. It's more like Ohan. It's constantly being co-created in every relationship, every interaction.
Like studying an animal in its natural habitat, not just in a sterile cage. That's the analogy. And crucially, he believed this applies to everyone, not just people with severe diagnoses.
We're all embedded in these interpersonal fields. Trying to understand someone outside of that context is, in his view, a big mistake.
You got it.
Okay, let's bring this down to earth with another example he used. The young man with the grand passions.
Ah, yes. The young man who kept falling deeply, intensely in love, but nothing has ever come of it. He knew something was off, but couldn't figure out what.
So a traditional Freudian approach might look inward, right, at the intrapsychic stuff?
Yeah, they might hypothesize about, say, Oedipal dynamics, unconscious wishes, fantasies about parents, that sort of thing. The analyst would likely be pretty silent, waiting for these repressed things to pop up in free association.
But Sullivan, he wasn't waiting. He wanted different data.
Totally different. He wanted to know what happens between this man and these women. He was looking for unattended interactions. What was it in his behavior, his pattern, that led these women to eventually pull away?
So instead of silence, he'd...
He'd actively inquire. He'd ask for the nitty-gritty details. Who is this other person? How did you choose her? What actually happened? Who said what? When exactly did the feeling in the relationship change? He needed the specifics of the interaction.
And through that detailed inquiry, what did he find?
He found something really interesting. This man, quote, works so diligently at investing each of his feminine love objects with rare and desirable qualities which she obviously does not have.
He's putting them on a pedestal, but a pedestal they don't actually fit on.
Precisely. And he'd expressed this profound admiration for these qualities which she does not have, so much so that the woman cannot overlook the fact that she is not the person that he is in love with.
Wow, so under all that great passion, there's actually a subtle rejection happening. He wasn't seeing her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was the pattern. Sullivan would then naturally ask, okay, where did this come from? How did he learn to destroy love in this fashion? And maybe was he loved in this fashion? Linking present patterns to past interactions, not just past feelings or drives.
This focus on the interpersonal process, it led him to see anxiety differently too, didn't it? Not just as a symptom, but as something more central.
Absolutely central. Sullivan came to see anxiety as a crucial factor shaping how we experience things and how we interact. He believed that many symptoms, even really dramatic ones, are often just distractions from and techniques for the management of underlying points of anxiety.
Which brings us to Oscar's story. Mid-30s, tormented by this chronic dread of being gay. Previous therapy hadn't touched that core fear.
Right. And his interpersonal analyst didn't just dive into interpretations about sexuality or family history. Instead, they focused on the last time these thoughts actually came up.
What happened?
Well, Oscar had spent a weekend with an old girlfriend. They had passionate sex. Then the next morning, she declined more sex. Oscar kind of provocatively asks, how about a blowjob then? Yeah. Predictably, she got angry. It triggered their usual conflict pattern. He got depressed, withdrew. And then he started picturing a man from the office naked, felt a mild arousal, which immediately alarmed him and sent him back into a cycle of agonizing about being gay.
Okay, so the analyst wasn't just looking at the gay fantasy itself.
No, the focus was on the way mental content, sexual and otherwise, is moved around in the service of managing anxiety. Oscar later realized that when things were actually going well with his girlfriend, when intimacy was high, that generated anxiety for him about commitment.
So the provocative request
Was almost guaranteed to antagonize her. It was an absolute certainty, pushing them back into familiar conflict, creating distance, which paradoxically felt safer, less anxious than intimacy.
And the homosexual reverie.
Served a similar function. It provided kind of comfortable confusion, a known, albeit unpleasant state that helped him avoid the deeper anxiety connected to closeness and feeling potent in the relationship. Sexuality, in this view, wasn't the root cause, but a tool to manage anxiety about intimacy versus distance.
That's a really different way of looking at it.
And it connects to his developmental theory of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Starting with babies.
Exactly. He saw newborns oscillating between comfort and tension, driven by needs, food, warmth, safety, tenderness, play. He called these integrating tendencies because they naturally pull people together, like mother-baby nursing, mutually satisfying.
Sullivan thought basic human needs aren't the problem. We're kind of wired to draw us into interactions with others.
Right. So if needs pull us together, why is there so much conflict? Sullivan's answer, anxiety. And crucially, unlike needs that come from within, anxiety is something visited upon the baby from the outside.
And he distinguished anxiety from fear. Fear has a focused loud noise, hunger pangs, and it's integrating, right?
Yeah.
Because it makes the caregiver respond.
Correct. Fear pulls the caregiver in to soothe. But anxiety, Sullivan said, has no focus. It's picked up from other people, often the caregiver, and it's a disintegrating tendency.
How does it get picked up? Through what he called empathic linkage. Think of it like emotional contagion. A caregiver is anxious, the baby picks up on that mood, that tension, even if nothing specific happened to the baby.
Wow. And the paradox is?
The paradox is that the caregiver, the person who could potentially rescue the baby from distress, is also the source of the anxiety. So when the anxious caregiver tries to soothe, their anxiety actually gets closer, making the baby even more anxious.
Leading to this snowballing tension with no possible relief. That sounds awful.
It is. He saw it as stressful, frightening, and inescapable, interfering with basic things like feeding and sleep, and later on with adult functions like thinking clearly, intimacy, learning. Anxiety is the monkey wrench in our whole interpersonal system.
And because anxiety feels so different from non-anxiety, Sullivan thought the baby's first major distinction is between anxious states and non-anxious states.
Which leads to the experience of a good mother associated with non-anxious states and a bad mother associated with anxious states.
Okay, so this is where the self-system starts to form.
Exactly. The child starts figuring out what leads to the good mother experience versus the bad mother. They learn to predict based on facial expressions, tone of voice, posture.
And then they realize their own actions can influence the caregiver's anxiety levels.
Right. This leads to organizing experience into good me activities that bring approval or relaxation from the caregiver. Bad me activities that make the caregiver anxious, like maybe fussing or touching certain body parts. And then there's not me.
What's not me?
Not me is for experiences or activities that provoke intense anxiety in the caregiver and therefore in the child. These are so overwhelming they get dissociated, almost erased. They're not recognized as part of the self, leading to things like amnesia for those moments.
So the self-system develops as the child actively tries to bring forth the good mother by shaping their own behavior.
Yes, it's an active set of processes, steering awareness towards good me experiences and away from bad me, and especially not me. This is how the self-system shapes the child to fit into the niche supplied by the personalities of his significant others.
Wow. So the outline of the child's personality is sharply etched by the acid of the parent's anxiety. That's a powerful image.
It really is. And because early anxiety is so terrifying, the self-system tends to be conservative. It steers us towards the familiar, towards what feels safe, even if it's limiting.
But is there hope for change? Can that etched outline be redrawn?
Sullivan thought so. He believed new needs for relatedness emerged later friendships, having a close chum in pre-adolescence, sexual intimacy, and adolescence. These new needs can potentially loosen the self-system's grip and allow for healthier, more integrated ways of being.
He called the anti-anxiety processes needs for security, right?
Yeah.
Different from needs for satisfaction.
Exactly. When anxiety looms, the need for security takes over. The self-system kicks in high gear, controlling awareness and shaping interactions to minimize that awful feeling.
This feels like a really significant break from Freud, especially regarding drives like sex and aggression.
Absolutely. Freud saw those drives as inherently problematic, a social, needing to be tamed. Sullivan argued they only become problematic if they provoke anxiety in the caregivers. The issue isn't the impulse itself, but the response of the human environment.
And the intensity of conflict isn't about the strength of the drive.
It's about the level of anxiety in the early environment. More anxious caregivers lead to more bad me and not me experiences, more parts of the self getting walled off. For Sullivan, the mind is fundamentally social. Meaning comes from how others respond to us.
Which leads us nicely to security operations. What are those exactly?
Think of them as our automatic, usually unconscious ways of managing anxiety. Sullivan described them as complex, extremely rapid, covert security operations to steer us from points of anxiety back onto familiar footing.
Covert and rapid, so we often don't even notice we're doing them.
Often not. A really well-functioning self-system does this suavely, smoothly. The analyst's job in this model is to help us become more aware of these operations, often through careful questioning, to create space for different choices.
And this requires a different clinical approach than the Freudian silence. You mentioned detailed inquiry.
Right. Sullivanian analysts actively inquire why. Two main reasons. First, language is personal. The meaning of words is tied to our unique interpersonal history. The analyst can't just assume they understand what a patient means.
And second,
Second, because of the self-system's anxiety avoidance function, patients often systematically ignore the very details and features of his experience that might be most relevant. The important stuff might be exactly what they're not focusing on. So the analyst asks detailed questions to help broaden the patient's perceptual consciousness.
let's use Fred again, the guy fighting with his wife. An interpersonal analyst wouldn't just listen, they'd ask specific things.
Definitely, they'd want to know, when exactly did the fighting start? What does he actually mean by fondness? When did his feelings shift? The goal is to get the fine-grained detail of the interaction pattern.
And through that, they might notice what?
They might notice, for instance, that a moment of genuine tenderness from his wife evokes a flicker of vulnerability in Fred. That's the point of anxiety. And almost instantly, before he even registers the tenderness, he shifts into critical superiority, maybe criticizing her, finding fault.
Transforming the potential closeness into a fight.
Exactly. It becomes a hostile integration, a familiar, negative, but ultimately less anxious pattern for him than vulnerability.
Because maybe tenderness in his original family was dangerous or systematically crushed, as the text says.
Precisely. So he learned unconsciously to turn those tender feelings into criticism as a security operation. It feels safer. The therapy goal then is to slow that sequence down. Notice the flicker of vulnerability. Notice the automatic shift to criticism so he can potentially choose not to make that defensive move.
But these operations are hard to give up, right? Because they work in the short term.
They always work immediately to reduce anxiety. That's the catch. They purchase a short-term reduction in anxiety at the price of a long-term maintenance of the anxiety-causing situation.
Like that joke about the guy snapping his fingers to keep tigers away.
Exactly. See how well it works. They're effective in the moment, so they become deeply ingrained. Real change for Sullivan wasn't just intellectual insight. It was perceptual, actually catching yourself doing it, becoming aware of, like Fred, bailing out of points of intimacy.
Got it. And Sullivan had a different view of obsessionals, too, compared to Freud.
Yeah, quite different. Freud focused on things like anal fixation, power struggles stemming from sadistic impulses. Sullivan saw the obsessional's intense need for control differently,
How so?
as a preemptive defense against anticipated humiliation and profound anxiety. He suggested they often grew up in families he called hypocrites, maybe experiencing harsh treatment while being told they were loved. This creates deep confusion and a dread of genuine engagement. Their controlling behaviors are attempts to disarm others before they can be hurt or confused again.
So less of Freud's fierce internal battle and more about striving for security in relation to others to avoid repeating past pain.
That's a good way to put it. It's about managing the present interpersonal field based on past experiences.
Okay, this brings us towards contemporary interpersonal psychoanalysis. Clara Thompson was key here.
Very key. Clara Thompson is often credited with shaping contemporary interpersonal analysis. She skillfully integrated Sullivan's ideas with others, like Sandro Ferenczi, who emphasized the real relationship and the analyst's empathy, and Erich Fromm.
Fromm added the idea of dreading isolation.
Yes, Fromm's humanistic psychoanalysis highlighted the fundamental human dread of isolation and how we shape ourselves to fit social needs. For Fromm, the unconscious isn't just repressed drives, it's also a social creation. We hide parts of ourselves that might lead to social rejection.
And this integration led to some shifts from Sullivan's original focus.
Two major shifts, really. First, a stronger emphasis on the present, the here and now, of the therapeutic relationship, rather than primarily excavating the past. While Sullivan definitely looked at history, contemporary analysts often see the therapy relationship itself as the main stage where the patient's characteristic patterns play out. The focus is on character, how the past shaped the present way of living and relating.
Makes sense. And the second shift.
The view of the analyst's own experience, the countertransference. Sullivan saw the analyst as a participant observer, sensitive but ideally objective and detached. Contemporary interpersonalists see the analyst as a full participant.
Meaning the analyst's own feelings, anxieties, even their security operations are inevitably stirred up by the interaction with the patient.
Exactly. The analyst isn't just observing the pattern. They're part of the pattern being created in the room, together with the patient. Edgar Levinson called this isomorphic transformations.
I so wet now.
Isomorphic transformations. It basically means the core interactional patterns repeat everywhere in the patient's past, their present life outside therapy, and within the therapy relationship itself. Same fundamental dynamic, different settings.
Okay, Let's revisit Emily, the resourceful, obsessional woman, to see this contemporary view in action. She kept people at a distance, focused on productivity, expected little from others.
Right, and her analyst started noticing his own reactions. He felt somewhat extraneous, like he was discouraged from saying much. He even felt this subtle pressure to make himself useful to Emily.
And that weird feeling of disconnect between sessions, feeling close at the end, but she comes back seeming remote, asking, "What should we talk about today?" Like they're strangers.
Yes, that ritualized quality. He realized it served to negate him and his impact, keeping him safely at arm's length. His own feelings, his countertransference, became the clue.
So he realized she was handling him just like everyone else. Expect little, figure out their needs, take care of them efficiently, then move on, maintaining distance.
Exactly. And crucially, in this contemporary view, Emily's assumptions about the analyst, like his potential needs or vulnerabilities, aren't just seen as projections from her past onto a blank screen. They're seen as likely to be grounded in her actual interactions with him in the present, albeit shaped by her history. His countertransference is a living reaction to her actual presence.
Because there's no truly neutral position for the analyst.
Right. The contemporary view is there is no emotionally neutral position. The analyst will get drawn into the patient's patterns. Trying to deny that just blinds the analyst and can lead to interpretations that are maybe unhelpful or even subtly punitive or needy.
So what does the analyst do?
They work on resisting transformation. By understanding how they're being pulled into the patient's typical dynamic, they can try to offer a different kind of presence, a different response. This might involve internal reflection, maybe directly addressing the pattern with the patient, or sometimes judicious disclosure.
Like the vacuum cleaner salesman fantasy the analyst shared with Emily.
Exactly, that striking image. He keeps showing up, she acts surprised, interested in the product, his help, but then resets the whole interaction each time, never quite acknowledging the ongoing relationship or maybe her own need, the dirty house.
And sharing that opened up deeper questions for Emily, didn't it? Like, would admitting she needed help feel like a humiliating admission? Could she tolerate the anxiety of not resetting, of allowing real connection long enough for something different to happen?
Those are precisely the kinds of questions that drive contemporary interpersonal work. It's about exploring those moments of anxiety and the defenses against them right there in the relationship.
Sullivan's influence really seems profound then, a pioneer for looking at things interactively.
Absolutely. He gave us a much more complex, decentered, contextualized understanding of what it means to be a person.
This idea that the self system is a construction, basically built to manage anxiety through illusions, it's powerful. We're not just one solid self, but have these multiple self-organizations that switch on depending on who we're with.
And that final point about horizontal versus vertical organization is key too. Freud saw things buried deep down, vertical repression. Sullivan saw incompatible parts of the self kept apart, side by side, through dissociation, horizontal. That resonates hugely with modern ideas about the self in philosophy, literature, everywhere.
Okay, so let's try to wrap up this deep dive. Harry Stack Sullivan, he fundamentally shifted psychoanalysis away from just looking inside the individual.
Looking at the space between individuals, the interpersonal field. He showed us how personality gets forged in those interactions.
And how anxiety is this central disruptive force we're constantly managing, often unconsciously, through our security operations.
Which develop within our self system to protect us, but sometimes end up costing us genuine connection. And we saw how contemporary interpersonal work built on that, really embracing the analyst as a full participant in that relational dance.
So for you listening, this isn't just abstract theory. It's a really practical lens for looking at your own life. When you feel stuck in an internal struggle, maybe pause and consider, could this be a pattern playing out between you and your environment, a security operation you learned long ago?
Yeah, it's worth asking yourself as you go about your day, what might be some of your subtle security operations? How might you be, managing anxiety or shaping interactions in ways that keep things familiar, but maybe not quite fulfilling?
And the provocative thought, what possibilities might open up if you could stay with that point of anxiety, that moment of vulnerability or uncertainty, just a little bit longer before the automatic defense kicks in?
Something to ponder.
We really hope this exploration of Harry Stack Sullivan has given you a richer way to think about human connection and the self. Thank you so much for joining us.
From us, your guys on the deep dive, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for another journey into being well-informed.